Welcome to Better Tech. Can you briefly introduce yourself for our audience?
Yeah, hello everyone. I'm happy to be here. My name is Irvin Cardenas, and I'm a research scientist at the Advanced Robotics Research Lab in Kent, Ohio, USA, which is an innovation robotics lab that focuses on developing humanoid telepresence robots and on the application of emerging technologies that may enable us to deploy and integrate robots into our society. I'm
Right.
also an advisor and mentor at a few international technology incubators and have industry experience in finance, aerospace, and the blockchain and cryptocurrency space.
Okay. So our discussion for today revolves around robotics and the future of HCI and HRI. So why don't we just start off with, in very basic terms, what exactly is HCI, HRI, and how are they different from one another?
Sure. So human-computer interaction, or HCI, is a multidisciplinary field that is focused on the design of computer technology and assessing the interaction between humans and such computer technologies. So this notion of computer technologies has really come to include a breadth of artifacts, such as software applications in the mobile and web space, augmented reality, or virtual reality applications. And so when we look at the fields that are involved in HCI, you can consider computer science, human factors engineering, and other fields such as cognitive psychology. Whereas HCI deals with the digital and virtual artifacts and how humans interact with such technology. On the other hand, human-robot interaction, or HRI, is a multidisciplinary field that deals with the interaction and communication between a human and a physical robot. So rather than considering the design or user experience of, let's say, a web application, we're considering the design and behaviors of a robot and how the robot's design or behaviors could affect humans cognitively or even physically. But overall, HRI really does borrow a lot of things from human-computer interaction.
So is there a point of convergence between the two?
Yep, there definitely is, in particular as it relates to human factors and studying human psychology. So HRI borrows a lot of the previous research and work and applies it into how human and robots interact.
And what are some of the challenges we are facing currently in the field of robotics?
So to really answer that question, we have to consider both technical and also social problems. When we look into the technical side, we can look at things like manipulation and task completion. So essentially, how can we develop algorithms to optimize manipulation tasks, and how can a robot understand what to complete or what tasks to perform? And then we look at to the social integration of robots. We have to consider a plethora of things, such as, for example, ensuring privacy, or what is the impact of having perhaps a robot interact with you.
Okay. And how does it then integrate with the fields of data science and cybersecurity?
So when we look at in terms of security and privacy, and we consider robots, well, robots overall, they're part of the Internet of Things. So a lot of the problems that we're faced within the Internet of Things are also faced by robots. So for example, when you consider a drone delivering a package or perhaps a service robot at your home, how is that data stored? How is that data secured? And how can we provide guarantees to the actual user that the data might not be exposed? How can we prevent hackers from breaching some of these robots and employing certain attacks? So these are sort of the problems that are translated from cybersecurity, from IoT, and put into place into robots.
Okay. And what are some of the emerging trends in HCI and HRI? Let's separate the two for a bit and talk about HCI first, and then we can talk about the emerging trends in HRI.
So within human-computer interaction, there's a lot of work currently being focused on virtual reality, augmented reality, and mixed reality applications.
Right.
So in particular, when we look at the current pandemic that is happening, a lot of folks are getting more into gaming. So what are the different behaviors and trends that are taking place? A lot of folks are actually buying more virtual reality headsets. So how is that going to impact the amount of time that we spend with these devices? Other things that we're considering now is, for example, telepresence. And that relates a bit both on human-computer interaction and also human-robot interaction. Whereas, for example, if you need to visit a place You might go via teleconferencing, or you might use a robot that integrates perhaps a tablet. So now the HCI question on that side is, for example, well, you're controlling the robot perhaps via tablet or a computer. So what should that look like? And on the robot side, the questions are, for example, how will the robot behave, or how will the robot move around when it's in a remote environment? So really, the current situation that we're facing has really extended a lot of the questions and problems that we're seeing within HCI and human-robot interaction.
And how far do you think companies have actually made progress when it comes to these things? Because so there are a lot of developments taking place, right, in the AR VR world. So do you think that it's also challenging at the same time to kind of keep up with the pace?
I think it definitely is. And so from a research standpoint, that's why we see a lot of subfields within the bigger field. So within human-computer interaction, some folks might focus on human factors engineering, and some folks might focus on augmented reality, and others in virtual reality. But overall, there's really a convergence. But there's definitely, when you look at the research and what's being deployed, there's not everyone can keep up with what's happening in parallel. And so what really happens is that you might have a business or an entrepreneur that just decides to go ahead and deploy something and learn from it, right? And you could look into, for example, Pokemon Go, right? What was the impact of deploying this sort of application that connects other folks into an augmented reality world? People might have explored this in the theoretical aspect, but they couldn't expect that people would go around in crowds kind of trying to find Pokemons, right? So it is really about trying to keep up, and also trying to see what everyone else is doing outside of these kind of small subfields.
Do you see a lot of startups getting into this field, or is this something that, since a lot of R&D is required, so is this something that you see more like SMBs and Fortune 500 companies kind of sticking to this, as opposed to less startups getting into this space?
So within the HCI space, from my personal experience working with some Fortune 500 companies in their R&D space and consulting, a lot of them kind of want to explore some of these emerging technologies, such as virtual reality and augmented reality, to kind of see how it could impact their workflows, or how perhaps they can appear more innovative. But we don't see like the real world use of, for example, augmented reality or virtual reality to visualize data or information. So we don't see that yet in kind of like the Fortune 500 companies, but respective Fortune 500 companies do have their R&D labs, their innovation labs that are exploring some of these things. But overall, developing the technology takes time, and understanding how users can adapt and use the technology also takes time. And so, for example, Facebook, who acquired Oculus, is really focused on virtual reality, and they believe that the future trend, right, of social networking could take place in the virtual world. So they're really targeting heads-on. But when you look at, in terms of sales and how many devices have been sold, it didn't really quite meet their expectations yet.
So you touched upon this earlier, that a lot of new developments are taking place, and people are in this pandemic environment. A lot of people are like buying headsets and everything. So how do you think this market has evolved? Has it opened up more opportunities, specifically when we talk about HCI and its importance for the AR VR world?
I think it definitely has. A lot of people are looking at different interaction models, right, of what it's like to be in the virtual world. How do you connect multiple people? What are the different behaviors that you might expect? It definitely has changed a lot of things. In particular, I think when as it relates to HCI and robotics, people are starting to consider more telepresence. So, for example, how can we use these robots that are remotely located? And how can we make the experience of interacting with these robots more seamlessly?
So
Or perhaps,
correct me if I'm wrong. So does that also translate into new opportunities for HRI?
yep, it definitely does. It definitely does. So in telepresence, for example, robotics is where human-robot interaction comes into play, where the question is, well, how does this robot interact with a remote world? And how do other people feel about this robot that is perhaps moving around amongst human beings?
Okay. So, Irvin, what are the 5 key ways you'd say that robotics are changing how companies do business? Like right now, if you were to pick 5 things.
Yep. So to really answer this question, I think we have to look at the evolution of robots and their environmental transitions.
Sure.
So when we think about robots and their real world applications, the biggest one has really been industrial manufacturing. So essentially, it's these cage robots that are very fast, very accurate, but also very dangerous. And so what we've presently been seeing is that we're moving away from having these robots in cages and putting them side by side with humans. And so once we do this, it really opens up a plethora of possibilities. And so in terms of 5 key ways that robots can change how companies do business, for example, we can take a look into increase customer engagement. And this is when we consider service robots in the hotel industry, for example, that are able to deliver goods and interact with customers 24/7. That's definitely a game changer. And so we can take a look into reliability and efficiency when we consider robot power manufacturing plants or logistics companies. And so this is companies that manufacture, for example, Adidas has a manufacturing plant that is enabled by robots. And when you look at, for example, Amazon logistics and warehouses that leverage actual robots to move packages internally. Another factor, for example, we can take a look into is enhance human capabilities and how robots can support humans. So it really isn't just about developing autonomous systems or self-sufficient systems. It's also about how can businesses leverage robots for example, dangerous tasks? How can robots enhance or support humans during these tasks? And for example, you can take a look at different types of tasks, such as infrastructure inspection, where before a human being had to perhaps climb up a building or explore different features of the building, we can now send robots and drones to kind of perform this inspection. Another thing that actually I don't hear much discussion is really making businesses smarter and more data driven. So consider how businesses can apply data collected by robots and how can this data be integrated into business workflows. And this not only applies to service robots, but also industrial robots that we may see. So, and then this really transitions, I think, the other part, the fifth one I would say is really trying to make business more human, where some of these robots can actually perhaps engage with a customer in a better way to provide a more human system or a more human-like experience for the customer, rather than, for example, dispatching a customer after making a purchase. The robot can engage with the customer more often, and so on.
So, but don't you think the general perception is that, more and more robots, the business is being less human-like. You're kind of taking away that human touch. So how would you say that it's not doing that and it's actually making a business more human-centric?
So it really depends in terms of the interaction that we are affording the robot with, but definitely you make a great point, right? Because we're removing the human touch. But for example, in different scenarios that we could explore, and this personally relates to my own research, is how can we provide jobs or opportunities for people that are across different parts of the world? Well, we can allow these robots to, for example, we can allow humans to employ some of these robots to provide customer service, right? Whereas, for example, if you might visit a restaurant and you might encounter one or two waitresses or waiters, you might employ a robotic system that is controlled by a human being that may live across the world. And so in that sense, you can actually bring a more human touch and provide a better customer service for the customer.
Makes sense. And speaking of data that you mentioned earlier, what are some of the data concerns we are facing today in the world of robotics?
So in particular, I think this really relates to bringing robots into the home, right? So because once we consider this, there's a lot of things that could go wrong. So in terms of data, where there's a lot of things to consider, but in terms of robots, one of the biggest questions or problems in terms of data really comes when we bring robots to the home, right? Once we provide robots the ability to kind of see what's happening inside a house, or hear what's happening inside of houses. It really opens up a lot of questions and problems that have not only have to be dealt from a technology perspective, but also from a legislative perspective, because
Absolutely.
essentially there's different kind of models or business models that could take place once robots really breach into the home. And this could be, for example, the fact that some of these robots might be rented to the individuals. So consider the case where there's maybe a type of butler robot that is controlled by someone else remotely, right? And so this sort of service can be provided by a company, right? And so the data that is being collected by by the robot is not only sent to the company itself, but also maybe to the user controlling the robot. And so there's a lot of questions that might come into place, and not only need to be addressed from a technological perspective, but also from a legislative perspective when we look at things like GDPR and so on. The other thing that we also must look into is really as it relates to smart toys or robots that are essentially toys. And so that's another whole different question as well. But it really, I think personally, I think the privacy concerns increase when we bring robots into the home.
Yeah, I agree. And so, just coming up to the end of our discussion. So, what does the future of an industrial robot technology look like, and what emerging trends do you see in the next few years with HCI, HRI?
So I think overall, it's really about moving from these cage robots towards more smarter, collaborative, and integrated systems. So smarter in the sense that these robots can leverage more robust algorithms, and collaborative in the sense that the robots can interact better with the humans. So they're not standalone islands. And the other part is really integrated systems, which really plays along with the vision of the Internet of Things. So for example, having a robot communicate with your smart fridge or your microwave or other robotic systems
Yeah.
is really what the future looks like. And so once you combine this notion of these robots being smarter, collaborative, and integrated with, for example, fields in augmented reality, virtual reality, it really creates different opportunities for innovation where, for example, we can visualize the state of the robot or can share information between the robot just by looking at through our augmented reality headsets or virtual reality headsets. But definitely, I believe that's the trend.
Okay. All right. So, thank you, Irvin, once again for being on BetterTech, and I enjoyed our conversation and your insights around this topic. I hope you found the conversation to be a good
Yeah, I definitely did. Thank you very much for inviting me over.
one.